So yeah, thank you guys for coming today. My topic is anonymous personalization without leaving Drupal. First of all, just want to do a show of hands. Who here knows what anonymous web personalization is? Pretty good showing. Who here has implemented some level of personalization for anonymous users? Awesome, that's great. So what we're going to talk about today is a tool set we've been working on for the past few years that really helps facilitate that within Drupal. But before we jump into that, give a quick intro. Let's go. Alright, so I'm Mike Lander. I work for Elevated Third. Here's my contact info. I'll show this again at the end, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask questions along the way. If I feel like we're taking too much time with questions, then maybe we'll push them to the end, but I did make sure to leave time, plenty of time for questions. But again, if you have questions later on or you decide you want to get involved, feel free to reach out to me. I'm not real active on Twitter, but I will make an effort to check it just for this personally. So what is personalization? Personalization is to alter the content and UX of a website to provide an experience customized to an individual's user, context, or state. So this is really like how we adjust and change a website to try to help them find the information they need, or maybe from a utility type perspective, show them information that's more relevant rather than just a generic experience that's the same for everyone who uses the site. These are some types of anonymous personalization that I've identified. Dynamic content recommendation, that's really the services where you say feed your content into a pool where it's aggregated. Then they're using that, maybe it's their AI system or whatever, to take that information and to give you information back that they think is relevant. So you'll see this in systems where you see this like hyper-targeted recommended content, and it kind of seems like it's reading your mind and it shows you specific things. A lot of third parties support that. It's not something we're going to talk about today. Another one is individualized tokenization. This is something where it's more taking the information they know about you and actually spitting that back out at you. An example of that would be like when you visit a site and it's like, "Hi Mike, welcome back to the site, Mike. In the weather in this place is this," or like it's taking information they know and literally just tokenizing that and throwing that out on the site. Another one that we're not going to be talking about today. The one we will be talking about is contextual conditions. So this is more focusing on taking the information that we know about someone or their device or a browser or whatever we can detect and doing curated content, so manually setting things where we're saying, based on this information we know, we want to show this. So a focus really being a manual curation process, and not something where something's trying to take a guess at what you want to see and just feeding you info. So an example of that from a marketing perspective, here we have two banners that we're showing. It's the same site, but we're trying to take a guess of what person's interested in, what type of food they're interested in this case, and we're going to show it something different. Another example of that might be a little bit more on the utility side. So in this case, detecting someone's on a mobile phone, or more specifically an Android phone, and we're going to show them a recommendation for a mobile app with a link to the Android store for them to download. And so this is again something that you don't see a lot of in the Drupal space, just out of the box. There's really no tools for that, and a lot of times it's a custom effort to build this type of thing, or maybe you're doing it with like some CSS and JavaScript, trickery. But what we're trying to do today is talk about more of an initiative to focus a tool set around doing this type of thing in the interface. So Drupal is great at providing customized experiences for authenticated users and flattening pages for anonymous users. But what if we want to provide customized experiences for anonymous users? So right now, if you look at Drupal's, say, their caching system, so there's the page cache system and dynamic page cache. Page cache is awesome in that it takes all your content, flattens it, sends it out to Varnish, sends it out to your CDN, sends it out to whatever, but it's really made for just one display for everyone to see. Dynamic page cache, on the other hand, is really set up for your authenticated traffic, taking parts of the page, making that cache, taking other parts, leaving that out of cache, or maybe reducing the time that's cached, changing that out contextually based on cache tags and using cache keys and all those types of things. So in no part of that cache system is it saying, for your typical anonymous user, let me change. You're good. For your typical user, let's change the experience. It's just not really built around that. So some things we could potentially react on and change the site to are things like looking at someone's cookies, looking at local storage, looking at what properties the browser says about the user, looking at device properties. Maybe it's visitor actions. First time visiting the site versus returning to the site, visited a certain page on the site, spent a lot of time looking at it at a certain page, scrolled past the initial fold. Anything that we can look at and start to determine, like, what is this person's interest and how can we show them content that's more relevant to that interest. And then third parties, connecting to these tools, or maybe we're feeding form data into, or we have analytics data, or whatever it may be. Can we take information back out of that and actually use it to improve that experience? And more. These are just some of the things we've outlined, but potentially with this tool set we built, the idea is that you could extend this in a lot of different ways. So introducing smart content. This is the first time I'm actually speaking about this module, so pretty excited. It's going to be, it's been our focus actually for the last 2 years, and it's something that really seen into fruition has been pretty awesome. Really, smart content at its core is an API and toolset for providing conditions and subsequent reactions. So it's taking things like we talked about on that last slide with cookies or local storage or whatever we can grab information on, and then allowing you to set reactions. Reactions like switching out view modes, switching out blocks, switching out these components and tools that Drupal's built and really good at controlling for authenticated users, and instead taking things that are more client side and allowing us to also alter content. It is not, however, an access control module. So this is a really important thing. If we're reacting on client-side data, there's not a lot we can do in terms of controlling how someone's able to tweak that. So the goal here is we're respecting all access control within Drupal. Like, we're not bypassing access control, we're not doing anything in that regard. But if you were to say showing, like, say using this for a gated resource, and that resource you wanted to show a form on top, and then once they fill out that form, you want to switch and show the resource, and you're switching between two view modes. Technically, if someone got into JavaScript, they could find a way around this. This is not something that we're doing this really hardened security on. It's respecting Drupal's permissions of having the ability to do something, and then it's using client-side variables to swap that out. That said, it is obscured. It's not something where 95% of your users or 98% of your users are actually going to know even what's going on in the code. But if someone really wanted to get in there, they could trick it. This is just, again, it's not meant for this. It's meant for more of a presentation side of things, swapping what they see, not trying to actually restrict access. So the ecosystem as it looks right now, smart content obviously being the main one, and that contains two modules, smart content block and smart content browser. Smart content block is kind of where our starting point was, and that's the ability to conditionally show different blocks based on whatever conditions you define. So you essentially end up placing a block, and then you say, based on these conditions, show other blocks. I'll be demoing that in a few, so you'll see what that looks like. Smart content browser is what's defining conditions from your browser. So being able to determine if someone's on a mobile device or desktop, if someone is has a certain cookie set or even allows cookies at all. Anything that we can determine from the browser is what we're starting to feed into there. Smart content view mode, still pretty early on, but that's going to be able to switch out view modes based on conditions. And smart content segments, it's really around defining conditions into groups that will be reusable later. So if you've defined your segment as some people on mobile that are on the East Coast or whatever in the Eastern time zone, if you want to reuse that group rather than identifying those conditions every single time, it lets you group them, gives you one place to go back and change that later rather than going through everywhere you use those conditions. And there's obviously a lot more to come. So actually, let's take a look at how this works. Any questions before I get started? Cool. All right, so we're gonna use the famous food magazine, Umami. So let's start with that example of if someone's on a mobile device, we actually want to change and show a banner for your app store. So what this looks like is we're gonna just use the block method for now of doing this. Inside here, I've just pre-created a block for showing that content. We're gonna leave that disabled, but just so we know, like, this is what our response is going to be. We're gonna place a new block here. And so basically when you create a new smart content block, it's built around this idea of variations. Variations are your container for a set of conditions and a set of reactions, and then you can do multiple variations. The first variation that's considered true, where all your conditions are true, that's the reactions you're going to get. So that way you can be like, if they're in segment 1, show this. If they're in segment 2, show this. If they're in segment 3, show this. But we're going to start real simple. These are the conditions as we've defined so far. And I'm going to take and say if the user's mobile. And it's worth mentioning, but real quick, to get to this point, all you have to do is go to the extend page and enable smart content blocking, smart content browser. There's nothing else. There's no additional configuration. That's all you need to enable. So we'll add that. So we're going to say if mobile. You also have the option of doing nots. And then we're going to say show the mobile app. And let's make sure we're not showing the title. And we're going to show this on all pages. And region is going to be set to alert. So I'll save this. Okay, so we placed our block. And now I always joke that we're going to do this from incognito. This is like the magician showing all sides of the box. Make sure I'm not cheating. Page is flattened, cached. It can be sent out to Varnish or CDN, whatever it may be. So then right now, obviously I'm on desktop, so refreshing the page, we're not going to see anything. I'll go into my tools here. Let's switch this to mobile, and then let's reload the page. The page has a chance to build again. And now we're showing that additional block. And if we jump back, it's still going to show it because we haven't rebuilt our page yet. If we rebuild our page, we'll hide that again. Let's take this a little bit further now, and let's actually show something more in regards to marketing content, maybe switching out the banners and stuff like that. So first, before I do that, I'm going to show you real quick what the segment stuff looks like. It's really pretty straightforward. So if I go into smart content, go into these segments, I've identified my segment names here. And in this case, we just put these out, found some arbitrary ones to use. And these are really simple. So I added a module to this called Smart Content Demo. All that module does is it has a single condition, and that condition looks for a cookie called demo. It makes it really simple to set this. So if that cookie called demo equals adventure, then this segment would be true. And then we did the same for dessert and for general. So I'll go back to the block page. And again, it's worth noting, like with these segments, this is the same condition stuff you have control of when you place an individual block. It just allows you to curate this in a separate area, manage it separate, and then reuse them as a group of conditions. You can also do and/ors. If you wanted to, you could do a group, which allows you to do and/ors and stack them and make them as complex as you feel like. But we're going to keep this as simple as possible for now. So let's jump back into block layout. And this time what I did is I have my additional banners that I pre-created for these. But what I'll do is I'll go ahead and disable the top banner for now. So we have our recipes banner. Let's disable that. If we look at the home page now, it's a little bit more barren. And then what I'll do is create another block. Okay, so this time I'm going to have 3 separate variations. The first variation is going to say, and you'll see my segments are showing up down here. So let's say if the user is in the segment adventure. We're going to add a reaction that shows this banner. And then let's take that further and say if the user is in dessert, let's see. And then we'll do another one, which is just the general one, which is going to be just the default banner. Okay, so I'm going to go in and save this. Right now, none of these are going to be true. Demo cookie has no values right now. So one thing we can do for that is, if we go back to the home page and refresh, nothing's going to show. Looking at the cookies are empty right now. So what you can do actually is, one part of the block system is that we have the ability to define a default or set a default variation. This meaning if none of these are true, you can show some content. So let's just say by default, if none of these are true, we want to show this last one. Save this, jump back, we'll refresh. And now let's actually go into manipulating this. So maybe you sent out some emails to people, and part of that email is that you put a referral. So like you targeted a group that referrals had some identifying information, and based on them clicking a certain link to your site, you're going to tag them and say this person's really interested in desserts. What we can do is we'll go into here and set up something to set that cookie for us, and then we can react on that. So when we refresh the page, we're going to now show a dessert banner that's featuring some steps for that. If they come in maybe more interested in adventure, I'm going to refresh the page, and again we'll switch out what we're showing based on a cookie, and then maybe we combine these two, and now we're showing the mobile app with the banner that they're wanting to see. Let's take this one step further. So now let's actually give them a form on the site that they can fill out. And based on what they fill out on that form, let's have that impact what they see in that banner. So I've actually created two simple forms. One form has a drop down of categories like taxonomy terms, which we'll put on there first. And I created another form that allows you to basically clear that cookies values. Not that it's a use case you're going to implement in that exact form, but you might decide later that the information you're customizing on might change, or you might no longer find it valid, so you might want the ability to clear out what that says. But let's start simple for now. So we'll create this food survey, jump back on this page. So our food survey is there. And then this food survey, it's actually going to fill out a separate cookie. So in our case, I have it the way I just wrote a really simple form alter that's saying when this form submit, grab the value from here and throw that into a cookie. So these are actually, let's do exclamation, and you'll see we've thrown in this extra cookie here, and now we have two of them. So to get this to actually feed in, we're going to want to change our logic up a little bit. And we're going to go into this dessert one, and we're going to grab our cookie name. And instead of using the segment, we're just going to go in and let's clear this out first because we want both of these to work. And then let's go in and create a new one called do group, and we can still add our old one in place. So we can say segment equals dessert. Or if cookie, and we can actually put the name of that equals dessert. So now we have an or where we're saying if either they're identified in that segment, or if their food survey interest cookie is set to this value. Then you also have some options here to do like equals starts with if this cookie set at all, and so forth. We've kind of implemented a type system in a sense where whatever you're doing for conditions, you have a widget that's involved. You can technically choose to use the type system, or you can build custom conditions. An example would be a condition group is more complex than type system was really intending, so that's just a one-off condition with its own form. So you're not tied to the type system, but it makes it a lot easier to extend. And then let's do another one where we're going to add another variation. And let's do one called starter. And we're gonna add another block called starter. Okay, and I'm gonna drag these up so that they will fire off first in order. Because we have that other cookie still set, now we're setting priority. And again, it's gonna say if this first one's true, do that. If it's not true, go into the second one, go into the third one. So we'll say if that's true, then we'll take this other one and we'll put that there. That way that first cookie we have set doesn't override whatever we're trying to do with these rules. So we'll check it. Good. All right. So we're gonna save this. And then we will jump back to this page. And so now we have our food survey interest equals dessert. Even though this is adventure, that one's gonna fire off. If we were to remove this, we're back to showing that one again. We can go down and change this to say starter. And now we're showing a different banner altogether. So now we're actually taking information they're submitting inside forms and changing the site accordingly. Then let's go to one where we don't have any rules applied. Just put something in, and we're back to falling back to adventure. So it's just, you can see you're just doing a series of rules and reactions, and it's finding the first winner it's going to show. And we clear both of these, and we're back to whatever we were just playing. Cool. So let's talk about a little bit how this actually works. So what happens essentially is you have this flattened page cache is kicked in, a placeholder div is rendered. This is actually how the modules or the block that you're placed is rendered. It's just empty, it just has a div, and inside that div you have properties. Those properties are the ID for that smart content set and any additional attributes it might need for rendering. Then what happens is the module also attaches all the conditions it needs. So anything you spent configuring in there, it's associating that data into your things like your conditions here inside of these. And so that data needs to line up with whatever's in that placeholder. What it's also doing is it's attaching any libraries that it needs. So if I create a brand new module, and to that module to process this, it has its own JavaScript library. It'll go out and find, here's all the conditions I used, here's all the libraries I need to process this, and it's going to attach those. This is also where you'd see, like, potentially if you needed to load a specific third-party library, depending on how you implement that. At that point, once that all lines up, it's going to, Decision.js is actually going to search the page, grab all those, make sure they align, and then it's going to start processing each of those placeholders. And so this is where it gets a little bit fancier. This is just kind of a high-level description now. So we have our decision with our variations in there. And then within each variation, we have our conditions and our associated reactions. So in this case, we have 3 of them. We're saying if it's mobile, let's show block 1. If it's cookie equals v1, let's show block 2. If it's cookie equals v2, let's show block 3. Then what it does is at first, before it processes it any further, it takes all these conditions out and it sends them into the condition handler. You'll see the heart here, that's to signify that I'm pretty proud of this piece because it's really performant and pretty cool. What happens is it takes all common cookies that are from the same source and it combines them first. So before it does any evaluation, it says, let's go collect that information. Let's go to this third party and get the user's company they work for, or this cookie, and grab that. It's going to associate that all together so that you're not making multiple calls to get the same exact information. Once you went and paired those together, it basically sends out kind of an event for things to subscribe to, and they're going to claim the ones that they're responsible for. So in this case, Smart Content Browser might grab the if mobile one, and the Smart Content Demo would grab like the demo cookies that I've set up. They go and retrieve that information, and they're going to return results for those. So mobile is false in this case, and cookie value is v1. It's going to then send it back into this system. So we take and we return cookie equals v1 and mobile is false. We're going to then go through here and say if condition mobile, then this is false, so this is not true. If condition equals v1, well, condition is v1, this one would be true. If cookie equals v2, false. Normally what would happen is this would run first and it would stop even processing v3, but just for sake of talking to those. So if the winner is found at that point, then what it's going to do is it's going to go to an endpoint that we've defined, and it'll actually grab that information and throw that out. So you imagine we have this fully cached page, we have a placeholder, and then a decision's made by JavaScript, and then it goes and grabs a cached result. So in terms of performance, it's really pretty fast because you're just hitting all caches, and at no point do you have to break out cache. So what can we use this for? Just some areas we've identified. Obviously, targeting segments is a big one, especially from a marketing perspective. The ability to segment your users and start to switch out content is going to be a really big use case. Content based on scoring. So if maybe you're starting to implement systems where we're scoring people based on their interest in certain topics, and then we're setting rules that are saying if this score is higher than this, or if this category is the highest score, let's show something different. Per device or OS content, maybe you have a form or a page that's showing downloads, and you want to show if they're on Mac OS, you want to show one file type. If they're on Windows, you want to show the other file type. You could actually use this to do the swapping of what they see. Gated resources, I think, will be a really big one. If we get the view mode stuff, when we get that wrapped up, you could have one view mode that's set as your gate, and that can have a form that displays on it. And then you have your second view mode, which is your full display of your content. And then you actually switch your roles around and say, before they've filled out that form, show the form. Once they submit the form, show the full content. Again, maybe it's targeting things like new versus returning. So your application has, some things that you want to explain the first time someone hits it, allows them to learn how to use it or where to start, whatever it may be. Next time they come to the page, you can expire that, and now they just see the full app without any of those explanations. Location-based customizations. This is talking a lot more granular than just locales, but like if you can determine roughly what area someone is, whether it be via time zone, using the JavaScript location stuff, using third parties that are identifying based on IPs or things like that. Maybe just changing the look and the feel of the site based on their location. If it's a product website, could you change it to have a different display when someone's on the East Coast or in, say, New York, the way you're showing that product versus in California, different feel, different look, that type of thing. Time of day customizations, I think there's a lot of potential here. One thing, there's been this recent effort with browsers to attach dark modes for nighttime viewing, and so I think taking that a step further and saying, like, do we want to switch up what content they see based on time of day? Actually, GDPR notifications could be a good fit for this. So that form, that consent that you have to have, someone agree to, we could actually use, first of all, are they located in Europe? Have they checked this box before? What boxes have they checked? That type of thing. Based on that, we could actually swap out what we're showing. And then maybe taking it further and doing A/B or multivariate testing with this. So if you imagine a block where the first variation is locked in as condition A, bless you, and the second variation is locked in as block B, or condition B, or B test, I guess. and then you set your reactions, you could then sit there and flip those automatically based on however you group someone. Multivariate, probably a little bit more complex. I think this will have more use case as we get into maybe doing field level customizations, because if you guys are familiar with multivariate, it would be taking, say, 3 different fields with 3 different variations of those data and showing every possible combo and determining which one's the winner. It's a little bit more complex kind of a use case, and it really requires more of a granular level than we're doing right now. You could do it, it just probably is going to be not the best fit. So how to get involved. So right now the module is in alpha state, and so what we're really looking for right now is people to start downloading the module, testing the module, really pushing the module, trying different use cases, trying it with different other modules. So maybe modules that control block display. You know, we're just now trying to test it more with like the layout builder. I already know there's a few issues there. Block field's another one that, you know, we have it working on, but there's some core issues that are kind of holding it up from working completely as we'd like. Any other use cases we really can think about extending it. I think that's the type of testing feedback we're looking for. And also if there's people interested in joining and helping as a maintainer. I think it's something that you decide you're passionate about and want to get involved with. We're always looking for help. In regards to getting this to a beta, we want to finalize our interfaces. We're at this point now where we're looking really through our code structure and deciding if we're completely happy with things, if we want to split some things out into separate classes, if we feel like the separation of concerns is where we want it, and then making sure that we commit to interfaces that we're not going to go back and change later and break everything that depends on them. Fix any beta blocking bugs. Again, this is one of those things that the more people can test this and use it and try it and find things and so forth, it'll really help us identify a clear path for that. And improve documentation. Ideally, people wouldn't have to go watch this presentation just to learn to get started. Anything we can do to help them figure out how to get this model set up and running would be awesome. Our target for beta right now is May 1st, so I'll be doing a similar talk at DrupalCon. Again, the goal is to get people in there using it, and based on feedback and response, they'll kind of maybe change that timeline, but we'll see how things go. And then where do we go from there? We'll obviously continue on to a full release. I would love to have a full release by this summer. Again, it really depends on how many people we get out there testing it, people submitting patches, people coming up with ideas and so forth. Extend the module features out. So one thing that's really nice is it's really easy to add conditions. I can actually show that briefly if we have time, but extending conditions out on this is really simple. It's really just defining a plugin that says what type of condition is it, and then defining JavaScript with it that goes and retrieves the information for you. All the evaluation and everything else the module takes care of. And then obviously, again, extending this into new directions with new types of modules and stuff. So questions? Yeah.
I was curious, I know Acquia has a module called Personalize, which is kind of their decision engine that underlies their like content, like personalization as a service platform.
Yep.
I just wondered if you had seen it and how, like, any ways that like this decision engine might compare with that decision engine, or any other ones that might be out there in contrib space.
Sure. So the question was about Acquia's Personalized module, which how it compares and how it affected, I guess, our decision with building this and so forth. So Personalized, at least last I looked at it, it froze basically after Drupal 7. There wasn't any Drupal 8 development on it. That might have since changed. But what happened essentially is I think their focus switched from supporting that to moving it into Lift, which became Acquia Lift, which is a really awesome tool in general, but I felt the barrier for entry was pretty tough with Lift. So trying to create something where even again some of these smaller utility type use cases and not looking for that full-fledged kind of product that Lift is, just getting people thinking about these types of things is really what kind of steered our approach. I actually originally worked on some contrib modules for Personalized, so that's where I first got familiar with it. but then looking in Drupal 8, just changing the direction and the thought process behind it, going a little bit different route is really where we decided to go. Cool. Okay. Well, I can either jump in and show you guys a little bit of how conditions work, or we can end early. Any hands if you guys want to see how conditions work? Okay, sweet. So what I'll do is I can actually show how that demo cookie one's set up. I think that's a really easy example, and then I'll show how, say, the browser ones work. They actually use derivatives, which they're not too complicated. It's just a little bit. It's an additional layer on top of plugins for generating plugins dynamically. So jumping over to code. So what I have here is I have my smart content demo cookie module. I have within the source plugin, you have to drop a class basically inside of this smart content condition. This is the path it's going to be looking for the plugins. So from here, I'm defining the rules for, or the properties for this condition. So I've got my ID, I've got the label for it. Weight is really just the order, which is displaying in drop downs. The reason we put that in is like something like a segment where you went out of your way to like configure and define this. You probably want that to show pretty high up.
Any chance you can enlarge?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
That good? Yeah, thank you. Unique is important because if conditions were to technically have the same name but be able to have different results, you want to process those separately. You don't want to group them together for processing. An example would be groups, like a group condition. They could easily all be called group, 1, group 2, group 3. You could have multiple ones because of nesting, but those groups have different conditions inside, so you wouldn't want to try to process them as one. So whereas a condition called browser width, the browser width is always going to be the same, so you can safely group those together, and then when you actually evaluate, you would split them up. And then type. So again, this is one based on a type, but technically you don't have to use the type system. You can just extend a different base class, and you can define all your own rules around this. But for the most part, we're trying to encourage using the type system and building out any types you need rather than just circumventing that. And then in our case, all we have to do for this is define, just get libraries, and we're going to define our library that we have for processing the going out and retrieving the cookie. So I'll go inside of this demo cookie JS, and what it does is essentially just it's kind of like a hook system for JavaScript, but essentially it's listening for anytime this is being initiated. It'll say if the plugin's name is demo cookie, which correlates with our name over here. So same thing, like if demo cookie, we're going to claim that field. That way no other modules are claiming it or doing anything with it. And then we're going to complete this. You can also use promises here. So if you have something that's dependent on, say, third-party data that's got to go and retrieve, and it's going to take a little bit of time, you can put a JavaScript promise here. Once it comes back, then you call field complete on it. Essentially what field complete does is it sets that status as being fulfilled, and then it'll loop back through and check all the fields and see if they're ready for processing. And if there's one still waiting, it's just going to wait, and each time it pings it, it just does a quick check and makes sure to see if it has all its conditions or not. And so once those are all filled, at that point it's actually going to process it. So that's all you need for like defining one that's grabbing from really simple things that are in the type system. To take that to, say, the browser stuff, it's in its own submodule. That's right. So inside a browser, we have our derivative, and then we have a base class for it. So this base class is, again, really simple. All it's doing is defining those properties again: ID, label, group, wait, and then in this case we're using a driver. The driver again is something for dynamically generating these, but you have to define a base class for them to use. So when we go into our derivatives, and we're then actually looping through and saying from the browser grab language, mobile, operating system, cookie, and we're defining what the type is. So mobile is a boolean, language is a text field, that type of thing. And with that library that we're connecting to, or loading in I should say, we're actually doing the same thing. We're claiming if it's browser language, go grab the language from the browser and return that. If it's browser mobile, it's going to do a comparison to try to determine if it's mobile, and then it's going to return it. So it's really simple logic. It's just claims it, processes it, returns it, and then evaluates. What's up?
Are there any, like when you release this fully, will there be an examples folder or an example of modules that you can kind of have something bare bones and stuff from?
Yeah, I think it would be good to do, like, sorry, the question was when we release this, will we do any type of examples folder, kind of a playbook, if you will, of like how to use the module? And I would say, I think ideally, yeah, we would get to a point where we do have some playbooks identified and we say, you know, using this combination for really common things would be good. It's a little bit figuring out how people are going to use it. It's part of the challenge because we tried to make it pretty open for any type of client-side contextual data retrieving. So I think our focus initially is more on the marketing content side, but I'd be curious when we put it out there, seeing like what use cases people come up with.
Yeah, it looks like when you try to learn beans for the first time, it's like you do one thing wrong and then nothing works. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally, it'll be pretty straightforward, but I think putting some documentation about like how to do a block and stuff like that would be really good.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Is there any way for the client to test that their conditions are working, or short of like opening up the console and
sure.
Adding a cookie or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is there any way for clients to test and actually see if their conditions are working? That's something that we're working on right now, actually. So kind of like the way Masquerade works, for example, for authentication, trying to figure out a way to do that and simulate these for anonymous. So in regards from like a coding perspective, it's not real challenging to do that masquerading, but trying to get a UI that makes sense, because you potentially would have to go in and enter in every single value that you're trying to mimic. Because if you're using your condition or the same condition to get the same cookie on 4 different sets or blocks throughout the site, you potentially want to test all of those together. So you don't want to just trick it into saying this one's true. Instead, you actually want to set that cookie to be what you're testing against and see the experience as you go through the entire site. So there's some things, but that could be pretty heavy of a lift, if you will, of going in and like changing that. So one thing we talked about is like using the segment stuff and allow you to trigger segments as true. And if those segments are true, then you would define those values that's looking for as true. And that way you could test it from like a segment perspective. And you technically wouldn't even have to use the segment in any conditions, but you could use it for predefining values or kind of groups of conditions that you're targeting. Cool. Any other questions? Cool. So, yeah, if you guys want to give me feedback, there's the link. Preferably positive feedback, but negative will do as well. Just calling out Contrib Day on Saturday. Definitely something, if you guys are interested in contributing to this, by all means, reach out to me. Jump in the issue queue, or if there's other things you want to contribute on, highly encouraged to get involved. Again, it doesn't have to be code.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
Did you explore any alternatives to like content authoring, like the variation authoring experience?
We have, and it's one of those things that it would be pretty easy, like even if you found a different way you wanted to approach blocks, like say The way you set context for blocks, I'm sorry, real quick, the question was if we explored other options for the content authoring experience of the module. So right now when you set blocks, you have the context groups down below and you set those. That's one thing we looked at is like, should we just make this like a conditional type of thing similar to that? But instead you're tying it into JavaScript or client side, settings. And for us, I think we settled on this because the ability to place an area and change that experience was more important than like having a relation of those, like if this one versus this one versus this one. So there's a lot of ways we've kind of looked at it, and this is one starting place, but I would say that if someone had a better idea or a different way they wanted to say approach block UI, the core of the modules are just about the conditions and reactions piece, and the way that the forms could work can be changed and altered.
Clarifying question, I'm not sure I understand. You said the priority was on the being able to see all the variations in one.
Yeah, and to have them be dependent on one. So if the first one's not true, then the second one would be true.
Right.
Whereas if you separated all out to individual blocks and just had a conditionals for the one block, for example, that just being one example of how we could have did the UI differently. Yeah, because then you would get stuck doing like not, if not this one, then this one, if you separate all those out per block. But again, it would be really easy to extend this module and create a different type of block that really just hides and shows based on one set of rules and has no variations really. It really is just one variation, if you will.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you guys again. If you, again, want to reach out to me, here's the way you can come find me at the booth or on Drupal.org. It's Michael Lander, Twitter, Slack, any of those work. Thanks.